Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, it is an important day that we finally see this legislation here and that we have the opportunity to debate it. The Australian Federal Parliament has failed to be a safe, supportive workplace in recent years. Indeed, we see all too often conduct that is incredibly inappropriate. But we know from the Set the Standards report that for too often staff had a very unsatisfactory experience. With the rates when it came to sexual harassment, bullying, intimidation and even so far as assault, just incredibly high. And the Set the Standard report shocked the nation that the idea that our Commonwealth workplace, which should be the gold standard, leading the way for the private sector and other areas, was in fact miles and years behind the private sector. But is it really surprising when we see the conduct in this place during the course of debate and often during question time? Because ultimately we have the government investing in a campaign which is about respect to address domestic violence, and we look at a campaign that is, respect started at the start. And as I've said, I think, and the member for McKellar has said, is we need to start it at the top. And ultimately, behaviour and culture changes comes down to leadership. And it's how leadership behaves that really makes a difference. And what we see too often, especially during question time, is behaviour that has vitriol, bad behaviour, and in particular, we have often in particular tried to discuss those experiences. And they are experiences that are, behaviour that is condescending, aggressive, misogynistic, and just the events of today just reinforce that perception and the very real reality that as soon as there is a viewpoint that is not the one that some members in this place, in particular members of the coalition, don't want to hear, they think it is their right to yell over the top of someone, to try and bully them out of the opportunity to speak. I would remind the coalition, this is the House of Representatives, and all communities under our Constitution have a right of representation and a right to speak. And so that's what this place is for. Just today, I had the Leader of the Nationals yelling at me that I should be careful. Now, what exactly does that mean? Is that a threat? Is that a threat that in raising my concern about conduct in the public gallery, that I should then feel threatened or intimidated from raising that point? That goes to the heart of what is wrong with this place and the culture that needs to change. And as today's events show all too well, that change has to come from the top. Leadership matters, and those in position of leaderships for parties need to do better. Or those below them in the parties need to seek for better leadership that will show the kind of example and integrity and the kind of behaviour that is becoming this place, and that we can set a standard for other workplaces. I know, and Set the Standard identified, many female MPs and staff have been subject to a lot of condescending, aggressive, misogynistic behaviour. If we are going to be a gold standard workplace here, and set the ethics, we set the laws that direct so many other workplaces, they look at the behaviour in this place and shake their head. The arrogance of members in this place to try and then dictate on other workplaces the standards they should comply to, when this very workplace does not comply or set any kind of standards of a similar examples. So is it any wonder that most Australians don't believe we are good role models, yet we are elected to be leaders of our community? The Guardian Essential poll reported in July that showed the public is extremely dissatisfied with members as democratic leaders. Only 29% are satisfied with the federal parliament. An overwhelming 75% think most politicians enter politics to serve their own interests. So is it any wonder that the public has so little faith in what we do here as parliamentarians when our own behaviour and standards are falling well below what the community expects of us? And it is just incredible the justification that we hear all too often. So in trying to raise the standard, people have said, oh, look, if you're not up for robust debate, you should do something else. I've been an Olympic athlete. I've been to Olympic Games and stared down incredible pressure and other aspects. I've been a barrister for 10 years. I've been in courts with incredibly robust debate and arguments. Never have I seen the disrespect we see in this place, in any other professional environment. And members in this place are kidding themselves if they think that in any way this is a question of robust debate. Robust debate is not disrespectful debate. And that's what all too often we see evolve in this place. And when I think of the children in years 5 and 6 of our schools coming to see that this is the place of debate, I really am concerned. And they all invariably raise concern and are surprised at the conduct they witness. And I often think it's nearly like a white line syndrome, that MPs come into this place and they think no one's, that it's going to be held to a different standard. It's part of the game of Parliament or of question time, without thinking about the impact, the role modelling this has. At a time where we have got a crisis of respect, we have a crisis when it comes to domestic violence, it really matters what kind of behaviour we say is acceptable behaviour, and it needs to start in this place. So, whilst I welcome the legislation we have before us today, it's incredibly disappointing that ultimately it does not apply to the conduct in this place. It does not apply to the conduct in the Senate or the conduct during Senate inquiries. Now, I appreciate it is because of the question of parliamentary privilege, but what I strongly support the amendment, and I do call on the leaders of political parties, go that extra step of leadership and endorse, and you take it to your party room and make sure that we endorse the code of conduct in this place as well. That is within every leader's power of political parties. Now, what's difficult is I have been a member of the Parliamentary Leadership Task Force, and I know how difficult it has been to even bring this legislation to this point. And obviously a lot of the deliberations of the committee has been confidential, and I do thank the government and the Minister and Senator Gallagher in her leadership in bringing it forward. And I very much want to thank the Secretariat and the Task Force Chair, Dr Vivian Thom, for all the work they've done to help us undertake implementing the recommendations of Set the Standards and bringing this legislation to the front. Establishing the IPSC is a key recommendation of the Set the Standard report completed by Kate Jenkins in 2021. And work on fully implementing the recommendations of this report has not been as quick as it should have been and many wanted, and it has taken too long. But look, we have to look at the glass half full, that progress is being made. Change to the culture of the federal parliament is happening, but events of today would say very, very slowly in this room at least. But I hope that at least for staff that this provides some level of security, or a feeling that they are now going to have a body to properly investigate complaints. So the legislation before us formally establishes the IPSC. In Set the Standards, the IPSC was recommended to ensure independent and consistent responses to reports and complaints of bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault in Commonwealth parliamentary workplaces. Again, noting this is part of our workplace, yet it is exempt from the application. So the bill aims, at least outside of this chamber, to apply those principles and that process. It will lift the standard, keep people safe, staff safe and MPs safe, ensuring there is the right support for everyone, MPs, senators and staff members alike. It's important to have a clear body that can investigate where these standards are not met. The draft behaviour standards of codes of conduct will now be enforceable by the IPSC, and that's important. And I thank my colleague, the member for North Sydney, and all those on the Joint Select Committee on Parliamentary Standards who did the work to prepare the draft codes. The IPSC will have the power to enforce these codes and investigate instances of where these codes have been breached for those who work in this place. It will also have the power to enforce sanctions on those found to have breached expected standards. Sanctions for staff will include fines or even dismissal. For parliamentarians, it's more complicated. Fines can also be imposed along with more severe sanction, but there obviously are issues when it comes to sanctions for parliamentarians. The bill formalises the Parliament's first ever workplace investigation framework to cover everyone, and that is real progress and well overdue. The Parliamentary Workplace Support Service, or PWSS, remains the place to provide advice and guidance for any in this place who need it. The IPSC is the accountability and enforcement mechanism for when the behaviour codes are breached. It will be independent, impartial, it will ascertain the facts, and it will conduct investigations. Commissioners will be appointed who have the relevant experience and training to ensure they can undertake their investigative function as fully and properly as possible. Investigations would be undertaken where a Commissioner judges sufficient information to do so with a complainant's consent. A Commissioner has discretion not to investigate on several grounds, including if the conduct would be more appropriately dealt with under any other law or by PWSS Complaint Resolution Service, or if it is a vexatious or lacking in substance. And that is important because obviously complaints can have huge reputational damage if it is vexatious or without proper merit. So it's important to note that if another authority at the federal, state or territory level has jurisdiction, it would be considered the appropriate place to take a particular issue or grievance, then that will occur. But the PWSS will remain an avenue to support people involved in an investigation, whether a complainant, a respondent or a witness at all times. So it is really important to emphasise the continued role of the PWSS that it will play in ensuring Parliament and electorate officers remain potential complainants are encouraged to seek advice from PWSS, who can talk through options to facilitate resolution of workplace issues. PWSS can provide advice about making a complaint to the IPSC if an investigation would be appropriate. However, there might be those who will be more comfortable reporting directly to the IPSC, and that is, of course, possible. In relation to the more serious misconduct, in relation in particular to parliamentarians, the Parliamentary Leadership Task Force has landed on a model which requires serious misconduct to be essentially referred to the Privileges Committee, and there will be a range of sanctions that can be imposed. I should say that is not my preferred pathway. I feel that is parliamentarian, because ultimately Privileges Committee, without detracting from their professionalism and authenticity and integrity, are ultimately also parliamentarians and are also party members. And so you ultimately have a situation where we are regulating ourselves. And to date, that has not been a sufficient deterrent to improve behaviour. So I do have questions about the effectiveness of the referral to the Privileges Committee and leaving it to the Privileges Committee to determine the sanctions, that the Commission will not make recommendations, and there is no requirement for the Privileges Committee to consider particular recommendations as to sanctions and, in fact, explain why they may depart from recommendations. Now, I understand the constitutional and, I guess, the ethical dilemma around that the parliamentarians are elected. It is not a traditional employment situation, and the Privileges Committee is the committee that has oversight over the conduct of parliamentarians in other circumstances. But it's clear there is an expectation from the public that we, as members of Parliament, need to actually be held more accountable than what we currently are. And so there is a question whether or not the Privileges Committee will be capable of doing that, especially since it is ultimately still government-led. And so the question around, is that going to provide increased scrutiny and conduct? Well, the jury's out. Ultimately, I support the legislation because it's overdue and we need it, but I think we need to be open to whether or not further amendments are going to be needed to ensure there is greater direction to the Privileges Committee and accountability of the Privileges Committee in how it gets there. But ultimately, I am appreciative of the steps the government has taken to engage in genuine consultation and seeking to get as broad an agreement as possible. That is the difficulty of the nature of this place. It's so adversarial that even the question of should we be all held to a better standard becomes adversarial in itself. And unless everyone genuinely is at the table wanting these changes to happen, it is difficult. Ultimately, of course, the public will judge us on how well we improve standards in this place, but the key is to make sure there is visibility on those processes, and I am absolutely committed as a parliamentarian to pull the curtain back on this place and keep the public informed.